For the invitation. I'd like to tell you about an urgent problem we have. Oops, sorry. How do I move this? Here. Okay. An urgent problem which is based on a fact which is widely ignored in some parts of medicine and drug development, the fact that we are all different. Every patient is different. Every tumor is so different, it has never been seen before. In addition, tumors are heterogeneous, which makes it even more difficult. Some areas of medicine take these differences into account. If you break your arm, the doctor has both the information on the exact break in your arm, and he has the ability to predict a response to optimize a personalized therapy for your particular arm. Drugs, in contrast, interact with complex biological networks in your body, which also differ from patient to patient, from individual to individual, and the doctor is trying to affect basically an unknown network by an extremely complex action mechanism of the drug. So essentially what happens to you if you get a drug is equivalent to having your left arm broken, going to the hospital and getting a cast on your right arm, because in a clinical trial, by chance, there were more people with broken right arm, and therefore getting a cast on the right arm has become the first-line treatment. Now, this has a lot of negative consequences. For example, those outlined in this Nature paper 3 years ago called In Precision Medicine, in which for the 10 highest grossing drugs in the US in this year, they also show the responders, the blue figures, and the non-responders, the red figures. And you see that there are a lot more red figures in these schematics than blue figures. In fact, they argue that the response rates for those 10 drugs are varying between 4 and 25%. This is not all. Drugs do not just act or not act, they can have side effects. And for example, in Europe, we have close to 200,000 deaths per year due to adverse drug reactions and a lot of morbidity. 5% of all hospitalizations are due to adverse drug reactions, for example. So this is more than colon cancer, the second most common cause of death for cancer. This all contributes to the enormously high costs of healthcare, which most people are probably not aware of. In fact, we spend roughly 4 to 4.5 billion per day on our healthcare system. Compared to that, things like the Greek debt crisis are fairly minor expenditures, and these costs are all over the OECD countries rising 1 to 3% faster than the gross national product. And you don't have to be an economist to realize that this is an untenable situation without counting in the effects of aging societies. Without disruptive change, I would argue we will, over the next framework program, spend €1 trillion on healthcare. We will come 7 years closer to the implosion of the European healthcare system and have the equivalent of the population of Milan die of adverse drug reactions, not counting the people who obviously suffer because of delayed treatment with the drugs which would really help them. So there's a certain incentive to look for disruptive change, and it is maybe somewhat unfortunate that health among the global challenges is one of the minor items, much less than digitalization and energy, and even less than food, which is known to kill more people because of overeating than because of lack of food worldwide. The disruptive change would come from a true personalization of those parts of medicine which are not yet personalized. And here we have to distinguish between stratification, which often has been called personalization, but isn't, unless we redefine the definition of what a person means, and true personalization, which can use to identify the optimal treatment for a disease which only occurs in a single patient. The model for that disruptive change is all over around us. In fact, all areas of our existence have undergone this type of a disruptive change based on the principle that in all other areas we have realized that we cannot avoid making mistakes in complex situations, but we can avoid their consequences by making them of computer models. So we don't build skyscrapers and watch them fall down in the first autumn storm. We build many designs, expose them to many different risks, and then select the optimal strategy for building the skyscraper. We do that in virtual crash tests. We train our pilots on flight simulators and not on real machines full of passengers. We predict our weather by this type of models. So the reason why we haven't done that up to now in medicine is very simple. Forecast models are only as good as the data you put into the model. For example, in a weather forecast, you need 75 terabytes of information to initialize the weather every day. If in medicine, the only thing the doctor has is the blood pressure of the patient, even the most sophisticated model running on the highest performing supercomputer would barely be able to distinguish between summer and winter. So this initialization, the data have really stopped this development, but this block is getting technically resolved by for example, the enormous progress we have made in sequencing technologies. My department was heavily involved in the Human Genome Project. We were, for example, working on chromosome 21, the second chromosome, which got published behind 22, which was done by the Sanger Center. At that point, we had fantastic machines able to analyze 96 sequences in parallel. In the end, it was even 384 DNA different sequences. Now we have a machine 20 meters from my office, which sequences 60 genomes every 2 days, and the costs of sequencing a genome have dropped from roughly $3 billion to roughly $300, including analysis. But this is not all. We have also made progress in many other areas, proteomics, obviously transcriptomics. This is one very important point, the heterogeneity of the tumors and microenvironments, the immune effects, which we can analyze by CyTOF techniques using up to 40 different antibodies in a spatially resolved analysis. So there are many different ways. In a sense, we can now learn more about an individual patient than we knew of all of human biology maybe 20 years ago. The models obviously have a different structure than the model we use of cars, virtual crash tests. Those are partial differential equation models. In our case, we use object-oriented models. The objects represent the entities which we deal with in biology, which get translated into systems of differential equations which can be solved numerically, and that brings us the problem of the parameters, which I can't go into it. That was the overall model, which is obviously quite complex. Now, I just mentioned that this also affects drug development. Drug development is enormously expensive because pharmaceutical companies are the only area I'm aware of in which the expected result is failure. It's only the rare exception which actually generates the money to keep the whole operation going. If you divide the number of drugs reaching a market by the total expenditure, you reach costs of 4 to 12 billion per drug, and some of those drugs buy relatively little medical benefits at sometimes quite high cost. In our view, most drugs probably work. You just have to identify on which patients, and that can be probably done by modeling just as much as you can run virtual clinical trials before even synthesizing a drug, and therefore before undergoing preclinical or clinical development. So essentially all models are wrong, but some are useful. Our goal is not to generate a right model, but a useful model. And for that, we are proposing a flagship project, 1 billion euros over 10 years, digital twins for better health, which sounds like a lot of money, but it's how much the EU spends every 5 hours on healthcare, and probably could save every 10 to 12 hours by using a different approach to personalization. So will every human in the future have her personal model as protection against dangers, as aid for the doctor to personalize therapy and prevention, and as support in wellness applications? So will you be able to figure out how to train for your next marathon without getting off the couch, just using your personal model updated from before birth through both clinical molecular analysis, but also by using pulse rate monitors when you're running? Thank you.
Another pulse. You met the time, the deadline. Okay. We open for questions. Please.
Hello, I am Donald Bruce, and I have been working on the ethics of nanomedicine since, well, a lot of years. And in connection with this idea of a kind of virtual self, I have also done a lot of work on the justification of animal experiments. Now, if you use an animal model, you have a mammal that's actually a little bit like you, but different. And the big problem is, how good is the model of, say, atherosclerosis, which doesn't exist in the mouse, giving it this strange thing? Now, at least you are working on a similar species. Here, you are not working on a species at all. So I am interested to see how far the expectations that you will deliver will actually be rather similar to what we expect from animal models. And actually, some of them are not that good. So I'm expressing a slight ethical concern to say, are we raising expectations here? Because obviously the proof of the pudding would only be in actually seeing, okay, we tried out this virtual thing, your marathon runner, and actually did the person really do well in the marathon, or did they not? So that's experimenting on humans.
We have spent probably $1 trillion on cancer research and related areas in basic research. I would argue, if this is not a good basis to generate models which are better than clinical practice, where we observe response rates of 25%, then maybe we should have spent some money on areas which are more useful for our existence. So I'm very optimistic that we will get better predictions. In fact, I think we are already getting now better predictions. And ultimately, those things have to be tested in real clinical trials, having 500 patients treated according to the standard of care of today, and 500 patients treated according to the predictions of the model. And then you see how much we can improve clinical practice. So it has to be obviously tested, but we are basing the work on an enormous amount of knowledge, and those models are self-learning, because if you always feed in the difference between prediction and actual response, the parameters get better and better, and the structure of the model gets better and better. In fact, you can also feed in the information from basic research, but I don't have the time to explain how.
The last question, please.
So, interesting talk. Just to give you an impression from clinical practice, 80% in medicine is experience. You know, empiria, it's the Greek one, it's called this. That's the truth, unfortunately. And if you mention that 25% is too low, you're right. But at the moment, it's no better way to really get more effective results in clinics, sometimes especially in cancer or other diseases where we don't have sophisticated drugs at the moment. That's the reason why we are seeking for some new one. But this is just a small statement. The other thing is, you know, simulation is very interesting, but how do you adapt your simulation to the clinical practice? That means, are you in a separate life working there, or how do you adapt or exchange your knowledge with really people who are working in the clinic?
It's very simple. You basically, every doctor who can treat a real patient can treat a virtual patient, so he can test all possible therapies, or at least the therapies he's considering, on the virtual patient. And if the virtual patient keels over and dies, he can reconsider. It's just like a pilot trying his flight maneuvers first on a flight simulator rather than in actual fact. So I think it is relatively easy to slot in. We obviously have to develop the technology for weather forecasts and virtual crash tests has also not dropped from the sky. And as long as we develop it with a bunch of graduate students, we will not adequately address a problem which kills millions and costs 4 billion euros per day. I think it is a technical problem which can be solved. We just have to get the will and the resources to solve it.
Thank you. I think we'll go to the last one, but I think before to add to your kind of discussion and topic, I think we have now a huge opportunity to make use of digital medicine really to change the world. I mean, and with digital medicine, you can get so much information and really understand things about treatment. So the thing to do now is really try to look at all this data, and based on them, at least we can say current treatment, what are the best options. And now we go to the last speaker of this session, and this will be Daniela Katz. And Daniela